Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. One of the hottest topics and trends today that's hard to measure is empathy. I mean, it is the new marketing black. But is it woven into your brand? From top leadership's look in the mirror to employees serving those customers, and down all the way to those customers and how they believe you are as an empathetic brand. Mentor Dial is an award winning author, storyteller, filmmaker, and professional speaker on brand and digital strategy, and a specialist in digital transformation. And on this episode, I'm delighted and thrilled to get a part two with Mentor, where we'll discuss his newest book, Heartificial Empathy, where he makes the case for why empathy is not only teachable, but a requirement for success in business and in life. So let's listen to an author with heartfelt empathy speak with an empathetic shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Mentor, thank you so much again for being on A Shark's Perspective, Part 2. But if
Indeed.
for those that haven't listened, tell us a little bit briefly about yourself, your background, and your career.
So thanks for having me
Of course.
back on, Kenneth. So I'm an American citizen with a French passport, born in Belgium, raised in England, and I have a Canadian flag on my computer just to make things complicated. I
Must
lived there
really
for
mess
3
you
years as
up
well.
when the World Cup comes on. You don't know who to
Oh,
pick.
that's so true, absolutely. So let's say in the realm of crazy life that I've had, I've enjoyed working in an investment bank. I've started up 2 startups, both of which failed, but in very different areas. I also worked at L'Oréal for 16 years, and I ended up running a brand called Redken. I ran Canada for the professional division, and then I was on the executive committee worldwide. And then since 2009, I've trucked out and I've been leading my passion and hopefully helping bring change to companies in, let's say, the space of digital transformation. But aside from that, I'm also a filmmaker. I've written 3 books. And yeah, I live between London and Paris.
Well, I know the first time we spoke, it was obviously about. I dove into the first book because of the historical perspective behind it that I loved. And then we really talked a little bit about future proof and digital transformation. But you've got a new book out, Heartificial Empathy. Tell us a little bit about the book, what inspired you to write it. And I mean, you turned this one over pretty quickly too, didn't you?
I did. Well, so there's a funny little story, which is I actually had planned to write another book, and that book, at some level, I've always felt it's the book of my life, which is this story about branding, but how branding needs to be both personal and professional. That's why it's a life story. As I was getting embarking on the idea of doing it, my editor fell sick, and so I had to put it on hold. And there I was with the summer ahead of me, planned for the writing. So I decided, listen, I'm going to have to tackle this one. It's a big topic. I've been writing about it before, but I thought, no, I'll slam it. Initially, I must say, I didn't know if I'd write a full book, maybe just a white paper. But anyway, it expanded and expanded. I got into many interviews and a lot of research, and I really persuaded myself that I think that empathy is going to be the top topic that people are going to be talking about, especially the front runners, over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think it's something that is at the heart of customer centricity
Mm-hmm.
and employee engagement and digital transformation, design, innovation, customer service, better marketing. So somehow it's a glue factor that will be needing to be inserted into business no matter where you are.
Then why do you feel that strongly about empathy? Why do businesses need it? Where are you seeing that they are using it or not, or recognizing that they need to use it?
Well, I think we're in a new world where brands need to express themselves in ways that are much more personal. You mentioned personalized, and the reality is that that expression is happening through employees.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's happening through media and so on, but to the extent that there's so many more different points of contact, you need to have engaged employees. And reality is employees working hard, they have good intentions, but a lot of environments kill empathy and in business. And the reason why that happens is multiple, but the primary one is that there's a stress on performance, and then people sort of get a little bit anal, little bit more control freak, get more stressed out on people, and that's not good for empathy. And the second part is that there's not enough time. People don't give the time to figure out what's going on in people's minds, listen, ask the right questions. It's just like, got to be efficient, got to be effective. And so these are the primary reasons that empathy is not existing in business today. You can have moments of empathy, but it's hard to keep it going forward as a real cultural dynamic. And then another part of this is that as far as making empathy strong in a company, we don't really understand why it's that important. It's another one of those soft tissue things. It's not a hard fact. It's not a tech. It's very soft. And I think that there's a general understanding in business schools, mindsets of people. Why should I bother with that? They're there to work for me. I tell them what to do. Let's make it happen. So the why of empathy is still missing in a lot of businesses.
Well, then how do you get them to translate that though to that bottom line? How do you convince the leader that creating and building and realizing empathy with your whether it's with your employees or your customers is going to help generate revenue and be better for that bottom line? Because you're not taught that in school. You're taught how to grow a business. You're not, but the way to grow a business is, you know, putting more ad dollars here or more tech efforts there and so forth.
Well, it's very hard to have a direct relationship
Yeah.
between a soft idea and an ROI, some immediate return on investment. So let's say the first principle is to be self-aware enough about who you are, and to want to ask that question: how empathic are we as an organization? And my gambit is less about being 100% empathic, but being more empathic. So if you can look at yourself and say, well, we as a culture are pretty crap at it, but we want to be more, well then, but don't set your ambition to be ridiculously high. Be realistic about it, and try to achieve that. Second point is to think about your C-suite, CEO, and that group of people, to what extent they are demonstrating empathy. And if they're not programmed for it, if they're not open to it, then it's very unlikely that you as an organization will actually manage to be any more empathic. So it has to come from top down, and it needs to be realistic according to who you are. And the idea then is to little by little, just like, by the way, digital transformation, it's something that you need to start small, specific, and make it relate to your strategy. So if your strategy is to be customer centric, well, then I have to believe that you need to have engaged employees. And if you want to have engaged employees, well, then you need to listen to them. You need to make them feel that their voice counts.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
that's where empathy, slips into it.
Well, then how do you sort of start? I mean, this is a bigger picture idea, but if you're someone, if you're an executive that picks up this book and you're looking to inject that now within your own team, where do you start?
Well, first of all, I would start with, why is that important? To really question, why am I trying to do this? And if you go back to your strategy piece, well, let's say that we think it's really important that the customer is more satisfied. Okay, then let's link it to that, and therefore there's going to be more attention to the resources we allocate, and more intensity to the desire to make it happen. Then afterwards, how do you make it come around? Well, a great idea is just to have a benchmark and understand, maybe ask the question: to what extent do your customers believe you're empathic? And maybe, an example that's brilliant is CVS. Nothing's perfect,
Yeah.
but CVS Group has a survey that one of the questions to their customers is: do you believe that CVS, demonstrated empathy to you in your visit to the store today? Of course, everyone has different ideas what is empathy, but that's a good starting point.
Hmm.
And so evaluate where you sit, and then try to think about why you want to improve more. Because at the end of the day, you also don't want to start like, well, let's everybody be empathic. No, render certain areas more empathic where you can figure out to be better. Maybe start by that, understanding, what works better in your culture, and then little by little it'll roll out.
Well, you as an author, I know, do a lot of research into the topic and speak with a lot of people before you put, necessarily pen to paper or so to speak. But you think about just in your own category that the book is up for an award. in the category of embracing change. So this change is going to meet resistance. What
Yep.
type of resistance do you hear from executives when starting to think about this? Because this is a very lofty idea that everybody can embrace from a 30,000 foot level. But is a resistance not making movement on that, taking movement on that action, or is it resisting the idea of this type of change?
Well, so the type of resistance you're going to get is, why am I going to spend money on this? It's
Yes.
just a
Yeah.
soft skill. And by the way, just putting money on trainings of empathy won't work, because this is not something you can teach. So the nebulous nature of it can be complicated, and you get pushback on it.
Mm-hmm.
A second area where there can be resistance is, or at least maybe the wrong approach to it, is to think, well, if I'm empathic towards my customers, and then that's going to make better conversions, and I'm going to get more money out of my customers, but I'm not going to pay attention to the empathy within my culture.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, my expression and my external approach is empathic, but internally we're not. I think that's a major problem. And there is a tendency, a shortcut desire, to want to look at how we can make my investment good externally towards the customer, because that's who we're being customer centric. We want to have more dollars come in, and it makes sense. But the issue is, and the pushback that I bring in, is where you actually need to self-evaluate and make sure internally you're congruent with this idea of being more empathic externally. I mean, because you imagine this: if you say to your customer service team, "Hey, listen, you guys, you need to be empathic. Listen to your customers. Really, be much better about that," and then you whip them into it.
Yeah. Right. Agreed. So you wrote about, in your last book, we talked about digital transformation, and specifically, at least within technology, how do you create that empathy? Because that is one of the, I mean, one of the toughest places. You've got people that champion their own tech. You've got ones who are resistant to change. You've got ones that are, don't understand what you're doing. How do you then infuse empathy into that type of relationship when digital transformation is really staring directly in the eye a lot of companies today?
Right. Well, so I think it's a marvelous opportunity to evaluate who you are and what you're trying to achieve.
Sure.
And the reality is that the conversation around empathy is directly related to your ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And as we look at, let's say, encoding artificial intelligence with empathy, one idea is, well, what is empathy, and what sort of empathy are we as an organization going to have? So it's a chance for a mirror on who you are, and it's a good opportunity to evaluate who you are and who you want to be. Check in whether we are as an organization. And when you go to try to code empathy, one
Mm-hmm.
of the challenges that is faced by all companies is that the coders are generally not the most empathic body of people. It's not, this is a massive generalization, but in order to be a good coder, you have to be extremely logical,
Mm-hmm.
detail oriented. Let's say in another, without meaning to be mean, quite anal about the way
Right.
you're focusing on whether this code is correct. And that is a profile that's hard also to be empathic. They're, as I say, they're sometimes difficult bed partners, being logical and empathic. So that's your community people, but you can still be empathic towards them as you go into the idea of coding. And the second part of that is also having to be careful about your ethical framework. What are you trying to achieve? Because you could be sociopathically empathic, which is about manipulation of a certain target group, and that might make them buy more of your product, but is that an ethical structure?
So one of the biggest things that, we're being, we're pushing ahead with is machine learning and AI today. It's, the top of mindset for marketers and tech people nonstop. How are you looking at empathy with where that fits into AI? Because that's going to take away, I mean, it removes basically bias It helps some of the personalization from a digital standpoint. But when you start injecting that into AI, how do you create an empathetic conversation with someone, or help either your employees or customers understand empathy when you've got that much AI? But I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
I do. All right. So first of all, empathy by itself into AI doesn't necessarily get rid of the bias. There are different forms of empathy. There are certain clans of people that might have great empathy within their clan, but
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily without it. So that's a first point. And as you go into creating your artificial intelligence, it's important to bring as much empathy as you can into the picture before you even set down your ethical framework. And then you might be able to program more diversity, a less biased approach, if that's something you want. Second key point is that when you program empathy, it's not like the empathy is in the ones and zeros. The
Right.
nature of empathy in the majority of the cases is really about the perception of empathy. And therefore, it's about trying to create a perception in the eyes of the customer. Well, they are listening to me. And so the third point is that it's really not about the machine being empathic, although that's maybe the ultimate goal. But today, in today's world and for the foreseeable future, it's about how machines can help humans be more empathic, in my opinion. So when you look at customer service that's using AI to enhance a customer service's rapidity of dealing with a problem, brings them banks or possible answers that the customer service rep can use, you're going to be looking at that data set and trying to help them be more understanding of the customer. So it's about how AI and the individual customer service agent can be more empathic together towards the customer, making an autonomous, empathic bot able to be good with you, Kenneth, and you and hundreds, thousands of other people. It's not going to happen. Certainly not at depth, and so, certainly not at any time soon.
So, how does empathy help accelerate digital transformation and growth and all these things? I mean, you've made the case solid, obviously, for the point of empathy. It's a topic that is really hot in marketing right now. But can you sort of make a point of where this is really going to help maybe drive that transformation more quickly, or what are some of the results that you expect that executives should expect to see from putting more empathy into their teams?
Well, the one thing before that I would typically want to focus on is listening.
Yeah.
So if you're in the mode of digital transformation, it's very likely that you have a lot of individuals in your company that have interesting perspectives, one of them being on the customer. And so often the customer is not present in the discussion. It's more about how can we get our costs down? How can we get a better distributor? How can we make quicker cycle of innovation? All these other elements. And with all of that, you've got a lot of intelligence within the company. So if you start thinking, well, maybe you should listen better, get better feedback cycle loop with our own employees, empathy starts being interesting within that. And what is empathy? Maybe that's also a point that we ought to address, which is it's not about being nice. It's really about understanding the other person's context.
Very true.
And in that, for example, you might have hard decisions to give to somebody. It maybe even not have a choice. So I have to give you a decision which you're not going to like, but you can bring empathy into that conversation by saying or making sure that you understand the other person's context before you deliver the bad news. And by being smart about that, you can deliver bad news in a much softer way where the other person might actually say, well, I understand why you're making this decision. So from the hard decision to the opportunity to get a collective intelligence, the opportunity to listen better and engage with empathy, probably is going to help you to go through this digital transformation because in the end of the day, digital transformation is a human project Very few people really enjoy change. And so the better your understanding of the human elements of it, and therefore understanding their context and why someone moving their cheese is painful for them, well, then you're going to be better off. You're going to be better off in getting engagement.
So what's the role in marketing in particular? Where does empathy fit in then within the marketing realm and that from that perspective?
Well, well, first of all, marketers as a bunch have pretty low levels of trust in the eyes of customers. And I think that's mostly because we're so manipulative and abusive of the technologies that come to we're allowed to use. Anne Handley is a perfect example of how to be empathic in your marketing
Yes.
approach. She really thinks through the title of your email that she sends out,
Yeah.
and it feels like it's to me, and that's because she really goes through that thought process. What is the other person who's sitting on a desk reading on a mobile? What are they going through at the time when they open up that mail? So the more you think about being in the shoes of the customer, well, of course you when you have hundreds of millions, you can't be in all of their shoes. So you have to be more strategic about that. But once you get in the mindset of thinking through when and where that person's opening up that email, then the chances are you're more likely to construct a better, more clickable, if you will, even though that's a little bit baity, but creating an environment where people are going to be more likely to listen to you. Get that exchange going and think of it more like a conversation as opposed to one directive. So marketers, if you can spend more time thinking about in being in the customer's shoes, that's how we're going to get to better customer experiences, better user experiences.
So the why necessarily did you think of in context of this book so many thoughts and empathy at least tend to focus around the customer and that frame of the conversation? What made you focus on the employee?
So I think that you need to be congruent
Yeah.
with your internal manners and your external manners. And this is true on many levels. And for example, within digital transformation, you might want to make your communications faster to your customer.
Mm-hmm.
You might say, well, we have a policy of answering all our Facebook messages within an hour or within 24 hours, whatever that policy is. Well, if you don't have an adapted communication style within the company, there's no way you're going to be able to be held to that 1 hour, 24-hour rule. And the reason is you generally have some sort of younger person who's given slammed with this approach and they have 1 hour to get back. And if they then send out to big boss so and so, hey, listen, I've been asked this question about a customer complaint or chemical formulation, and I don't know how to do it because I'm just a social media manager. And if the rest of the organization isn't oriented around the idea that you have this 1 hour policy, then there's no way that's going to go through. So you need to be congruent with your internal processes and communication style with the way you want to be externally. Otherwise, one day you will be outed with transparency. Individuals will renegade employees will say, well, it's not at all empathic inside. There we are trying to just sucker you in with some more marketing mumbo jumbo.
Right. All right. Well, something we didn't do on the last show, I'm going to do on this show. So, Mentor, are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Uh-oh. Yes.
All right. You're living in Britain, but you're in France where I'm interviewing you today. So, it's very apropos. Charles de Gaulle Airport or Heathrow?
Oh, Heathrow.
All right. Number 2, hot tea or iced tea? I
Hot
guess,
tea.
but I thought you were an American.
What I do not like is the over sugar, the iced tea.
Yeah.
So that's a for starter. And the second of all, my wife has taught me the wonderful benefits of hot tea.
That's what I'm drinking right now. So, Prince William or Prince Charles?
Prince William.
Easy. Uh, Future proof or Heartificial Empathy?
Hmm. Well, artificial empathy.
For sales, Heartificial Empathy. For where you feel the most proud of your work.
I'm proud of both. I think they
Agree.
serve two
That was a
different.
bad
They,
curveball question.
no, it's okay. No, and of course, I'm going to be happiest with my last one in some regard because there's always an evolution of each of them.
Right.
I think that future proof is really about how to onboard technologies in business. This one is really more of a cultural shift,
Yeah.
and I think it's actually societal. So I think that we need in society, in our daily lives and families as well, to be more empathic. So there's a bigger mission within it.
Well, and that is a perfect segue to the most important question. And the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits.
Thank you. So, again, Mentor, where do people find out more about you? Buy the book. Where can we find you speaking and listen to your podcast as well?
So thanks for that. Minterdial.com is my general hub of everything. I have my podcast, which is largely, on all different podcast services like iTunes and Buzzsprout and so on. And quite available on Twitter at MDIAL. And my Heartificial Empathy, which just came out, is exclusively on Amazon. It's self-published book and Kindle. And I would love it if people send me questions, thoughts, rejections. I'm good for conversation.
Absolutely. Well, Mentor, thank you again. It was great reconnecting on the show.
We will be in touch.
We'll see you soon. So there was my part 2 conversation with Mentor Dial, an award-winning author, storyteller, filmmaker, and professional speaker on brand and digital strategy, and a specialist in digital transformation. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from that conversation. First, at least in his mind, Mentor believes that empathy is going to be the top topic for what people are going to be thinking about over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's hard to argue against that. And quite simply, yes, brands need to express themselves with more empathy today. As he says, you can have moments of empathy, but it's hard to keep it going forward as a real cultural dynamic. So why is the bigger question? And why is empathy still missing from a lot of businesses? I mean, I didn't get taught empathy in business school, did you? As he explains, it's hard to have a direct relationship with a soft idea like this skill versus an ROI in business. The goal is not to be perfect, just be more empathetic. If your leadership doesn't believe it, then it's hard to achieve. Second, you've got to make empathy relate to your strategy. As Mentor said, and I quote, "So if your strategy is to be customer-centric, well then I have to believe that you need to have engaged employees. And if you want to have engaged employees, well then you need to listen to them. You need to make them feel like their voice counts, and that's where empathy slips into it." Great point. For executives, make sure that you don't fake this also. Otherwise, you're just throwing money away on worthless training, and you can't whip people into their support. For a company, it ultimately comes down to when you've truly chosen to focus first on your customer. For a company, this should truly be woven into your ethics as a brand. Look in the mirror and take a look at who you are, at what your brand is. Third, for people worried about tech and AI and the robots and bots, understand that empathy is not about the ones and the zeros. As he says, the nature of empathy for brands is really a perception in the eyes of the customer. In today's world, it's about how machines can help people be more empathetic. Such a great point when he said that marketers as a bunch have pretty low levels of trust in the eyes of customers. And I think that's mostly because we're so manipulative and abusive of the technologies that we're allowed to use. Such a powerful point to consider as we all implement more technology. You've got to think about being in the customer's shoes, having conversations with them, not just being one direction. Then the better customer experiences, the better user experiences get woven into where you can express empathy. Got a question? Keep sending those emails to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So start sharing, keep caring, and most importantly, keep sharking. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.